Now, when it comes to the fate of performing arts in Wichita, there's more on the line than just the fight over Century 2. The economic impact of shows large and small, venues historic and new, the wrestle over parking, and how to bring more shows like Hamilton into our city are all complicated issues. We have an excellent panel to discuss it all this evening. On our panel, we have Lindsay Benacka, Director of Arts and Cultural Services for the City of Wichita, Rick Bumgardner, the Artistic Director at Roxy's Downtown, Angela Cassette, Managing Director of Music Theater Wichita, and Alex Thomas, Managing Partner at the Cotillion. Thank you all for joining us. Let's have a round of applause for our panel. So just today, actually, Marketplace Morning Report had a story about how regional theaters are having a hard time bouncing back after the pandemic. So I want to come to you first, Rick, and ask what you are seeing as the biggest challenges facing performing arts, the industry, and in particular, as someone here at a smaller venue, what do you see right now in the Wichita area?
Oh gosh, I think nationwide, and I think she will agree with me when I get into this. Please jump in anytime you want to jump in here, and we can do this in tandem. The cost of trying to produce theater since COVID has, in some cases, doubled. Raw materials have gone up 30 to 50% in a lot of cases. The insurance inside this building, and we've never had a loss, raised by 37% last year. Our electric bill doubled, and we're not reflecting that in those ticket sales. And so it is relying that audiences are going to come, and we're going to be in a full situation for us to be able to make it through. We have 152 seats at best in Roxy's. Right now you're sitting in a facility that only has 140 because we've taken out 12 seats for this particular production. And if we don't sell over 125 tickets, we're not going to make money inside Roxy's downtown. And that's a struggle. And we have not seen a growth since COVID in terms of more numbers coming to the theater. I mean, obviously we dipped drastically for that year and a half when we were social distancing, but trying to get back to that has really been a tug of war. You know, come on, you know, take a chance on us, take a chance on seeing things that may not be the normal shows that you would be aware of, because at Roxy's we do a little edgier kinds of things. So it's just been that, Sarah.
So a whole bunch of things.
Yeah.
Just that. Well, do you feel like it's, are people, you know, because you hear people kind of like excited to do things again after the pandemic, but then I don't know that they always mean it. I mean, is it sort of like people just feel differently about it in your experience, or what's the?
You know, what I'll say is during the pandemic, when we were open, and it was an ethical dilemma as to whether we should be open, right, during that health crisis that we had. The people that would come to me and say, thank you for being open, thank you for taking us away from the Greek tragedy in which we're living at that time, made me know that people really appreciate the arts. But now that we have come back and everybody is opening, it feels like the art world is becoming kind of last on their list of things to want to get out and do. And so it is that struggle. And we're also in a bit of a recession here in the United States. And so when you're talking about spending $15, $20 someplace versus here at Roxy's, the cost of a ticket for a main show with the ticket fee that the ticketing company charges us that we pass right on to you, and the taxes, it's $40. They'll go spend that $215 because they can do 2 or 3 things versus come here, I think.
Yeah. Hey, Angela, did you have something to add?
Yeah, well, we're noticing, and it's funny because in Wichita, Music Theater Wichita is considered to be a very large theater, but we actually are also a very small regional theater. And although we play in a venue that has about 2,100 seats, when you look at our budget size and the size of our staff compared to colleagues across the country, Wichita is a relatively small town, and we happen to be a very arts-rich community. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity to support that, but I think we're really in need of investment at a number of levels. And that's from the community as a whole, it's from corporations, it's at the individual level. what we've really noticed is that we've had some of our season tickets drop off. And we know that some of that is because outdoor shows aren't for everyone, and we've been in a position the past 3 years where we've had to do some outdoor productions. So we're hoping to see a bounce back in subscriptions when we do all 5 shows inside for 2024. But we've noticed that drop in subscriptions, and the subscriptions are really what enables us to operate year-round and to fund our operations. And that combined with what Rick is talking about, which is all too real, with the costs of everything being higher and labor shortages and all these different things that hit lots of industries, including the arts. It's a tricky position to be in.
I want to come back and talk about some of that, where the show is going at Music Theater in a moment. But first, Alex, I want to come to you and ask, because Rick was mentioning materials prices going up and these different things. What is at the heart of it for you? You're at the Cotillion. You've got several other kind of businesses. What do you find that people are just less interested in gathering and being in close proximity there at the Cotillion, or do you find that there are other kind of fundamental issues for you?
I don't think there's the gathering is an issue necessarily. I don't get that sense at all. I will concur that, raw materials, overall overhead has increased, whereas the ticket sales are down. We still pay the artists, in some cases, more than they asked pre-COVID. I mean, that's just the nature of the beast. They weren't, touring. A lot of them weren't touring during COVID. So they're trying to recoup as well. But ticket sales are down, and inventory is light, and the amount of venues that are popping up has increased. So increased competition, no discount on talent, no discount on just facilities, and less ticket sales. So we're working harder, doing more events to meet revenue expectations.
Yeah, just to be in the same place.
Yeah. To be in the same place. So, and I will agree, because I own 3 smaller bars, so I see that. I think the way people are spending trend towards just a lower spend overall. So 2 of my bars had the highest revenue we've had, even pre-COVID. But going out and spending $20, like you said, is a lot more reasonable on a Friday night, where they can be social and hang out, than spending that $50 on a ticket and additionally drinks to have that same kind of experience. Not same experience, but to get out and be social. It's just a more reasonable spend. So, that combination, I mean, it's not a end of the line type of deal, but we certainly have not matched the attendance numbers that we did pre-COVID.
Lindsay, I want to come to you here. Do you find that there's sort of you have sort of a broader perspective on this, being with the city? Can you share a little bit about that and just how you think the pandemic has impacted performing arts here in kind of large strides, and then other factors that we haven't discussed yet?
That's a lot of things, but I'll see how many
Let's
I can
see
tackle.
what we can do with that.
I mean, from the city's perspective, and I'll also offer the information that I was not here pre-pandemic or post-pandemic. I've been with the city about 1.5 years, so I can't really speak to what happened before then. But from the city's perspective, we're involved in this industry from a lot of different levels. We own and operate some facilities. We own but not operate some facilities. We operate some but not own some. We're also a fiscal sponsor and funder of a wide array of nonprofit sector in the arts and culture industry, not just performing arts. So we're involved in this area left and right. And I think I'll echo kind of what everyone said. The cost of doing business has skyrocketed, but the revenues haven't. From our funding standpoint, where we fund Music Theater Wichita, we really are only in the nonprofit sector right now as a funder. The amount of eligible applicants has continued to grow. The amount of eligible asks continues to grow, but the actual funding that we distribute does not grow. It's been pretty stagnant since the start of our cultural funding program, despite the need and the growth rate within the community. So our dollars aren't going as far as they were 10, 15, 20 years ago when we started that program. I will say I came to Wichita because we had this program, which is unique. Not every city or municipality even has what we have to offer. So we're doing a lot of things well, but we're just not stretching the dollar as far as we used to. From the city's perspective, we're also engaged in the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study with Americans for the Arts, which Wichita has thankfully been a part of for the last 20 years. So we have a lot of data showcasing the growth of the arts impact in the local economy, just the nonprofit sector over 20 years, which has really shown that growth rate. But again, we're not matching it with anything. So we know the arts are generating, specifically in Wichita, transient guest dollars, heads and beds, bars and restaurants, that an arts tourist spends twice as much than anyone else that's traveling for tourism or leisure activity. But we're not necessarily pairing that with direct investment into the arts, which is not necessarily good or bad, but it's just notable, saying that we're not reaching the same market value that we were 10, 15 years ago, despite our costs continuing to rise.
So other challenges that we seem to have here are more to do with a tug of war for certain facilities. And I actually attended a Music Theater of Wichita show this summer in an outdoor amphitheater in Andover, which was really different from being at Century 2. But MTW and Hamilton could not occupy the same place at the same time, right? So, Angela, what do you think of when we discuss those sorts of challenges? We're we all love our arts here. Everyone's so pleased that Hamilton got to come to Wichita. But how is that sort of decision made? How did that get to happen? Would you kind of just share?
Sure, yeah. I mean, that was a very unique situation where that really was a COVID outcome. It's just that in the arts, the COVID ramifications continued for years and years because we do our planning so early. So when Hamilton came to us and said, this is the only chance Wichita has to reschedule this show, they had planned to come at a time that was during the fall, which would be normal for an American Theater Guild touring show. But their tours were canceled for about a year and a half because of COVID. And then Wichita was not high on the priority list for rescheduling. And so the only set of dates they could get was in June of 2023. And so we sort of said, Music Theater Wichita doesn't want to be the reason that Hamilton doesn't come to Wichita. I will say that really hurt us to the tune of probably $350,000 to $400,000. But we sort of felt like either we can be the partners in this town and say, this is a show that needs to come to the city and we're going to step aside voluntarily, or we could have sent it to the city council and made them kick us out, which wouldn't be good for anybody, right? Like, because they would have they probably would have had to make that decision as a business decision. We have already said, this is not normal for us. We're not giving up the dates that were guaranteed in the summer. American Theater Guild isn't going to come back and ask for that. So I think we're going to be fine moving forward on that. But it is there is a decent amount of how do we try to use the spaces we have as much as we can and get the most number of things accomplished. What we do is a fairly slow production process, which is why when you come to a Music Theater Wichita show, generally speaking, you can understand what the actors are saying. And often when you go to a show that tours through Century 2, which is a very tricky space sound-wise, you have a hard time understanding what's happening on stage. It's not always the case, but it's often the case. And that's because we have more production time in the space than a tour does. So it's very complicated. But thank you for asking. We were really glad to have those outdoor options, especially during the pandemic. And personally, I am thrilled that I won't be getting ulcers because of the weather for the foreseeable future.
All right, thank you. Yeah, you don't throw me out. I'll go. I'm gonna go of my own volition. Yeah, that was a difficult choice, probably though. Well, that's interesting. So I want to come back to that idea of just how much Wichita loves its arts community, because I mean we have so much. I don't know. Actually, do either of you have, Lindsay or Angela? Do you have like numbers on like per capita or anything? I didn't think to ask that before, but. Is that something that we know? Because we talk up here about how much we love our arts community. Are there numbers that actually reflect that? Do you know, Lindsay? This is just a side question.
give me 6 months and I'll have
Okay,
that data.
We'll come back.
But I mean, I would like to say 100% of Wichitans care about the arts.
Mm-hmm.
At what level, we don't necessarily have that direct impact numbers, but Wichita, without a doubt, is supportive of the arts community. I think that's an easy statement. Obviously, this many people showed up on a Tuesday night to talk about it.
Mm-hmm. So, Rick, I want to come back to you here and ask what what you guys offer here at Roxy's are just sort of those more unique opportunities for people to experience. What is the kind of feedback that you hear from people who love what you guys offer and want to see it continue? What are like the upsides to this?
Okay, well, first of all, excuse me, I should have welcomed you all to Roxy's downtown. Thank you all for coming tonight to be a part of this and be here in the facility. Our mission here at Roxy's is to entertain, inform, educate, and inspire our audiences and our artists around us. And so we take that to heart. And that's why KMUW is welcomed in every month to do Engage ICT here, because we see ourselves as a partner just not within the theater that we do, but within other arts organizations within Wichita. And so we host the Heart of America Men's Chorus. We host we do private events for groups, city, Arts has been here, Harvesters has been here doing a number of things. And so, we look to that, and that actually kind of led us to the place that this theater is sort of unique in the fact that it can be a place for every voice. And so we really celebrate diversity and equity and inclusiveness here at Roxy's downtown. And I try to pick shows that, who knew a year and a half ago when I was looking at La Cage aux Folles and talking to the director of that production, that whether a drag queen can read a book in a library would be a hot topic just at the time that it comes to Roxy's downtown. It hadn't hurt, Sarah Jane, it has not hurt. And so what has happened is the people that come here and see two young 22-year-olds direct their very first production about 6 high school students in Canada and their incredible look at life, or come and see the musical body adaptation of William Shakespeare's Two Gentlemen of Verona, or the play that goes wrong where I'm jumping off of a 5-foot platform, or La Cage aux Folles. It is amazing to me the opening of eyes and the voices. And one of my season ticket holders came up to me on Thursday night at our opening this past week and said, "I think the way you bring people together is simply amazing." And so I continue to try to look to do that. And, for all that I said about, what's causing us alarm, we're looking to expand. We're looking for some educational opportunities in here to bring to the community. And I'm not just talking actors and directors and scenic artists and those kinds of things. I'm talking to the professionals out there so that you could sit here on a panel with Sarah Jane and not be quaking in your boots like I am at this moment. And we're looking at a semi-professional chamber choir that can go out and work with underserved populations and do some concerts here. Because as I said, we want every voice to be represented. And it's a great venue for that to happen.
Thank you. I have an audience question here. This is the perfect audience question. We're going to go to the Century 2 discussion right now. They say, looking forward to replacing Century 2 as a performing arts center, what plans are being considered? Has a private-public partnership been suggested? And I think, discussing this is really interesting for me because we did a whole Engage ICT about the fate of Century 2 before the pandemic happened, and then the pandemic happened, and it changed everything, as we all know. Angela, do you want to give us kind of the skinny on where we are right now?
Sure. There's honestly a lot that I don't know at this point. I really appreciate the question. I think there are a number of models to consider. My understanding is that the city manager is really interested in a different model than what we have had, which is that the city owns the building. Up until a couple of years ago, the city managed the building. You don't see that a lot in cities anymore. Some of the cities I've worked in previously, like I worked in Omaha, and they had a situation there where there was a separate nonprofit that managed their spaces. They had a very large Orpheum Theater that could do touring Broadway and opera, and they had a beautiful concert hall that hosted the orchestra and other things. And so there was a nonprofit that managed that space. And that was really useful because then that nonprofit could raise money to keep the building up. But there was a lot of city investment. In a city like Omaha, there is a ton of city investment and there's a ton of private investment. I've been some other places where, the city helps build but then steps out, or the city leases the land or the building to somebody else. So I think there are a number of options, but I just don't know where we are at this moment, honestly.
Before we come to you, Lindsay, I know we'll need to do that, but so you had mentioned earlier about the investment that needs to happen on these different levels. From your perspective, do you see one glaring, one area where that's really particularly lacking? Are we lacking the individuals who are making larger contributions? Is that the thing that would change it?
Well, I think we have a lot of really generous people in Wichita. So I think it actually is really sort of a team effort, but I do think there are cities, Omaha and Tulsa are examples of cities nearby where there is just a lot of philanthropic investment. And there's a large number of business owners and leaders that sort of sit in a room together like people did in Wichita 53 years ago now, and they said, everybody get out your checkbooks, we're going to get this done. And 53 years ago, what people did in Wichita is they sat in the room and they founded Music Theater Wichita, and they founded the zoo, and they founded Riverfest, all in the same year. So I do think there is that, heads are poking up, right? But who is going to be that, in our generation, who among us are going to do that, are going to say, we're going to be the activists or the people that can do the major funding? Who's going to do that and get us to that next place? But I do think it's more of a team investment than to just say, we just need another couple billionaires, right? Yeah. I think it's more complicated than that.
Lindsay, will you give any other piece of the update on Century 2 that you can provide?
I can try, and I'm the latest to the party in the Century 2 question mark because it predates me by a long shot. The latest iteration of the suggested plan from the city's perspective was presented to City Council a few months ago with Populous in partnership with Visit Wichita and the City Manager's Office of really reimagining the existing round building with an expansion of Bob Brown really as convention, looking at it as a tourism hub, which if you followed that plan at all, you noticed pretty quickly that performing arts was not included in that, with the assumption that performing arts would exist in a new facility somewhere else. The City Manager's Office, as well as City Council, has been very vocal in saying no dark days for performing arts. So the future of conventions at Century 2 in this new plan assumes that performing arts exists somewhere else, and that conversation needs to happen before anything could happen with this new plan for Century 2 to happen. So I think it's an incredible statement about the performing arts community's status within the city's infrastructure, that we recognize it's important, versus just displacing the performing arts community and saying, hey, we're going all in on tourism, and once we get the recoup from that investment, then we'll build performing arts. But to make that very vocal commitment that performing arts would come first in any sort of build or construction is really important. But that being said, we don't have a funding source for anything at this point. Even if we were ready to hit the shovel tomorrow on a performing arts center or convention, those dollars are not fully committed by any capacity.
All right, so imagine, if you would, that right here in the middle of the room, there appears a genie, and she will grant you one wish for performing arts in the Wichita area. It has to be for, it can't be $1 million just for you. So what do you wish for performing arts of the genie if you just had one wish today? Anyone want to go first? Go ahead, Angela.
Yeah, I'll go. I want a new building. I want to be clear about that. I definitely want a new building. But that is not what I would wish for. I would ask the genie for a real transformational mindset shift. I think we have some of our community there because we have people in this room. But I think our community really needs to understand that arts are business. What we do is creating an ecosystem in Wichita that would be sorely missed if it were gone. And I am a big fan of the small business entrepreneurial culture in Wichita. I think sometimes performing arts are left out of that. And I'll give you a statistic. So Music Theater Wichita this year, we have about a $5 million budget. 1.5 million of that money is going to local Wichita-based artists, technicians, orchestra members, administrators, actors. That much of the money is staying in our community just through salaries. And that doesn't count the we print our playbills locally, we do all these other things locally. There are a lot of small businesses that don't pay out $1.5 million in salaries. And yet there is a lot of recognition for what they add to the community. So I feel that if we as a whole community could understand the arts really are a critical part of our economy, then the decision making would flow from that and we would really be able to dream together. I don't know how many people are familiar, remember when Exploration Place was built. I was not here at that point, but I had just an amazing conversation with Phil Frick, who was one of the volunteer leaders that had Exploration Place built. And it is an incredible story of Wichitans coming together and dreaming big and not settling and making something really incredible. So I would like to see more of that in arts and culture. It's a long wish for my genie.
That's a good wish. Rick, what do you?
So let me piggyback. It's interesting that you just said what your budget is. We actually had sales of about $900,000 in 2022, and 287 of that was local people that are either employed right here inside Roxy's downtown, or cast and crew and band orchestra members. And so fully almost a third of that money is spent right here locally. And if that genie were standing there, I would ask her for the resources to employ those people so that they don't have to work for minimum wage or sometimes less than minimum wage or scale. Because what they do here at Roxy's is 90% of them, 95% of them have other jobs. They come here because it's their passion, not because they can support themselves. And I would love to see more of that happen within our community. Sarah Jane, I just read an interesting article by Bill Hirschman, who used to live here in Wichita, and he's now down in Florida. And nationwide, the retention of artists within the community since COVID, it's just eroded. It's finding craftsmen who can build sets or paint sets or sew costumes. They don't want to do it if they can go work a 40-hour-a-week job for $50,000 or $60,000 instead of $40,000 working 60, 70 hours a week because it's their passion. I'd love the genie to say, we reward you for passion.
Alex, how about you?
That's a tough one. I would probably wish for not as much division in this town. Like, there seems to be very downtown centric versus west versus east. And I was guilty of it as well until I owned the Cotillion. And I realized how far out west we were. I used to think, going past Tyler, I was like, wow, this is far. But, I'm past Tyler now. So, but I wish people were more willing to travel for the art, and that it wasn't so divisive. That we didn't have to just focus on one area of development and think that our art scene or community will develop out of it. I think there's just as many important people out west. It's just as important to bring performances and events at all ends of the city. And I wish it wasn't so difficult to achieve that.
That is such a Wichita thing. Do you want to go to such and such a place? Oh, it's 20
so
minutes
out there,
away.
yeah.
Oh, it's
Yeah, and most people in larger cities, I mean, they're traveling half the distances and twice the time. I mean, we have a lot of, someone mentioned parking, and along with that wish, I would say I wish people would walk. Like, the funny thing about this place, you were talking about diversity. I played here in 1999, recorded my live album with my band here, and it was a great experience. But people forget that there are places that exist upstairs. Like name 5 businesses in Wichita that you have to walk a flight of stairs to. But then, as a business owner, you're like terrified. Oh, I can't put a business there. It's upstairs. What are we going to do? So, I mean, there needs to be some sort of mentality shift, with Wichitans, because we have a lot of conveniences, and in bigger population density areas, business owners have to do this. They have to go upstairs. They have to, cause you to travel. So I would want an overall shift in mentality.
Lindsay, how about you?
Man, these were all really good, you guys. So I'm going to just yes and everything that was saying, but really thinking about shifting mindsets in a lot of different areas, and not to discredit like facilities. Yes, we need better, more facilities in all capacities for performing arts and just arts and culture in general. But I'm thinking like 2 things. I wish we could invest or embrace riskier art forms or the creation of new works in a way that doesn't impact bottom line, because the business side of what we do is super important, but we should also be fostering the creation of new work, and not to say the classics aren't great or that we shouldn't be doing cats or anything like that. Like those all have their space, but we should really be fostering the entrepreneurial spirit that exists within this community to create new works without ruining your bottom line at the same time. Like there should be an incentive for that to some capacity. And then along the lines of like changing mindset, like I obviously work for the city, and I see a very engaged arts and culture community, but I would love and I would wish that engagement would turn into leadership within the city, within your municipality. I think we have so many creative, brilliant minds within this community that I would love to see on a board or commission making decisions at various levels of government to help. We have a lot of critical mindsets on our boards and commissions who are fantastic, but if they were paired with a creative mindset, I think we would be an unstoppable community. So I would challenge, like, if you're a creative mind in the room, look at our boards and commissions list and sign up and serve on one of them. You might not think you know anything about planning and zoning, but I think the way an artist looks at a map is very different than the way an urban planner looks at a map. And I think when we combine those mindsets, like, we can have really beautiful communities. So I think just shifting in mindset, because we already have the community, but I would just wish that we could level it up a little bit more.
Kirk has a question. Kirk, would you please make your way to the microphone? That's really interesting. So we want sort of cultural and mindset shifts and money and maybe some organizational shifting with some mindset. That's very interesting, though, that most of what we would wish for is in people's minds, which ought to be pretty doable. So I don't know. Anyway, Kirk, will you please ask your question?
And that brings to mind just a quick other comment in terms of mindset and resource and infrastructure. We have a tremendous example that we can look to for how just a little tiny thing, 1 penny, literally 1 penny over 30 years can make a huge impact on a community. Do you remember what downtown Oklahoma City looked like in the 1970s and 1980s? It was a hole. They put a program together, it's called MAPS, and I don't remember what the acronym is, but they put a 1-cent sales tax. You have a convention center, you have a performing arts center, you have a second convention facility, you have Bricktown. All of that has been funded over the last 20 to 30 years with a 1-cent sales tax. And by the way, in, I think it was 94 or 95, they went back and said, you know what, we're doing great with the redevelopment piece of this. Let's split this. Let's go half of this and give half of it to the schools. Guess what? Oklahoma City hasn't had a bond issue for their schools in well over 35 years. You know why? Because they've been paying for it with cash out of the Maps for Kids piece. But anyway, it's a great example. What I really wanted to ask, and this is primarily for Lindsay and for Angela, is, and I know it hasn't been a long time, what impacts are you seeing on local groups from the privatization of the management, specifically of Century 2? And I want to make a couple of quick observations. Someone needs to tell whoever needs to be told that jacking up the parking the weekends of Hamilton and Riverfest was stupid. All it did was make everybody angry. Every person who went into Century 2 that day was mad that the parking was jacked up, not just a little bit, egregiously. The second thing is, it's become very clear, literally in the last 2 weeks, and in one case, the last 48 hours, the cost of using Century 2 for music theater and for the Wichita Symphony and for any of their other tenant organizations is going to go up significantly next year. Or you're going to see a $2 per ticket surcharge because ASM has decided, in addition to the significant rents paid, they want $2 a seat. What are we going to do about that? I want to know what kind of impact you all think that's going to have.
Thank you, Kirk.
Well, I just want to say, you're really speaking my language on the maps thing. Yeah, go ahead.
The second piece of it, literally in the last 48 hours, you can look forward to your labor rates going up by 20 or 30% because ASM has begun advertising for a private labor service to bring stagehand labor into town. The current agreement with the union, apparently they're going to try to break it. But QSR is about 25% more expensive in my experience.
Well, first thing I want to say is yes on the MAPS program. That's been a really amazing thing for Oklahoma City. And I would love, speaking of mindset shifts, I'd love for Wichita to consider how something really small like that could make a really huge difference for so many people in our community. And I would say, Music Theater Wichita, it's a little bit different. I can't speak to everybody's experience. We have a lot of things that are locked in because of our memorandum of understanding with the city. So our relationship with ASM is largely governed by our MOU with the city, which is still in existence for a few years. So rates are, relatively speaking, locked in. We have our own agreement with the stagehands union, so we will continue to operate under that agreement with the stagehands. We did agree to a per ticket charge. It is $1 per ticket for us, and that will be passed along. Both Music Theater Wichita and the Wichita Symphony have very, very low fee structures compared to a lot of other places. We tend to bake in a lot of our fees. The Symphony bakes in all of their fees. And so I think that there's some real potential for that to be a big concern for them. And I would say that we have, generally speaking, a very good relationship. It helps that some of the ASM employees were City of Wichita employees who have been working in the building for a number of years. And I think that's all I'm going to say about that. Lindsay.
It's a tough question, and I don't want to beat around it at all, but it's a very dynamic question because there's just a lot of different moving pieces of that puzzle. Century 2 is subsidized by the city pretty heavily, and we have hired ASM to help us reduce that subsidy. By no means are we looking to make money on the building, but we're trying to get cost under control without raising rates as much as possible. That being said, we're significantly under market value for the space in comparison to other like-minded venues regionally and nationally. So how do we how do we recoup our costs or lose less money in the space without displacing our local community and without losing out on opportunities like Hamilton when they come through. So ASM has an uphill battle of trying to make new money where money didn't exist, and parking was one of those. The facility fee that we're implementing with tickets is one thing. The nice thing about both of those is all those funds that are essentially raised go right back into the facility versus being subsidized by the city. So the facility fee that you will see on your ticket prices with MTW and Symphony, and they've already been folded into other events that are coming through, those dollars go right back into facility infrastructure. That's what helps pay for toilet paper and light bulbs and just general facility needs versus just relying on the subsidy from the city. So it's a very dynamic challenge. We are working with ASM on a booking policy committee to really look at our booking policy. We've not actually raised rental rates in quite a few years, other than like a very small stair step. And that booking policy committee includes major users of the facility, city council, ASM, and members of the convention community to really look at how can we holistically look at this challenge and this big question mark to reduce our subsidy, but then also not displace community at the same time. But it's a very dynamic question and a very dynamic challenge, especially knowing that the long-term solution does not exist within our current portfolio. So even if we were able to break ground on a facility tomorrow or a new performing arts center, we won't have one for a few years. It'll take some time. So we're kind of on an uphill battle, but slowly tackling that as a community. I will say ASM is also really challenged with hiring. I don't know about the stagehand union's contract that you're discussing, so I won't speak to that, but Century 2 is a very tough topic within the community. I hear all the time, like, didn't we bulldoze that? Is that still there? It's still there. It's still open for business. ASM is aggressively trying to hire and build its team, and it's had a challenge in doing so because of perception from community of who wants to work there without knowing what their job security looks like. So we wanted to be clear that Century 2 is open for business, and there's great events happening in there all the time, but we are still working through the business model of it, and it's not a perfect solution, but we are working through it, and we are listening to community at the same time. I do encourage everyone, reach out to me if you have questions or concerns. Reach out to ASM directly. You can also reach out to your city council members as well. They've got some big decisions to make within the next few years about what the future of the space looks like, and what should we be subsidizing versus what should we not, or what does the best business model look like for that space. So those decisions are not made in a vacuum or behind closed doors. They are really community-based decisions, but it's a tough discussion.
Lindsay, I might want to stay with you on this next one. I have an audience question who asks, how do other communities help protect Native performing arts organizations from competition from touring shows? I wonder if you can kind of start us on that. Maybe, Angela, you want to add in a little bit?
Can you say that again, Native?
How do other locals? Communities help, to protect the local organizations from touring shows?
Ooh. It's tough because every community is so different in what their facilities have to offer. I think ultimately is what spaces exist for these levels of performances to come through. Wichita has a ton of different venues at different capacities, but from the touring aspect, not a whole lot. We've got the arena, and we've got Century 2 in terms of like theatrical Broadway type tours or your Cirque du Soleils, but we have also tons of venues like Roxy's, like the Cotillion, like the Wave that can bring in all sorts of different ones as well. So from the municipal level, we would be supportive from like Visit Wichita and tourism to really look at what can we do, what can be incentivized, or what could be just supported at any level. But then ultimately it comes down to what facilities do we have, and then also how are we divvying up the calendar of dates available to prioritize locals or prioritize revenue generating touring acts that come through and really bolster local economy. So it has to be a balancing act.
Do you want to add to that a little bit, Angela, of what others do or what we do or should do?
Just a little bit. Yeah, I think it's really normal for a city to have both touring shows. And what's not normal is for a city of our size to have as many theaters that produce. Like, this is very abnormal in a good way. So I do think that in many cities, touring is the thing, and that's what everybody thinks about is theater. But I also think, Wayne Bryan, who was our producing artistic director for 34 years, always sort of looked at the touring shows and said, well, that's good. Like, if people are seeing more theater, then they're seeing more theater. And we want people to see more theater because we think they'll get hooked and they'll come see our shows and they'll come to Roxy's and they'll go to Wichita Community Theater. They'll go all over. And I think we've had a couple of unusual situations over the past couple of years where that has felt a little more competitive at moments because you just feel like there's a scarcity in the marketplace. But overall, we want a bigger pie, and we want to have that mindset of there being a bigger pie. Where I don't want to get into the specifics of how challenging it is to get titles from licensing houses, but I would say that is more of a problem for us, is not being able to get titles to produce here because they're being held for Broadway or they're being held for tours, and that's a national problem, not a local problem. But if Lindsay can solve it, I am all for it.
So Rick, I want to come to you. You had mentioned plans that Roxy's has. If we're thinking about, moving forward, what do you see as some of the biggest opportunities that are out there for our region right now, and what are you looking to do?
I think one of the things that, and Angela just touched on it a little bit. Theater, the more theaters that there are, it's just better for the entire community. The more arts organizations that there are, it's just better for the entire community. I don't feel competition with any theater here in Wichita. I mean, I can't tell you how many people said, you're really going to do a show in the summer while music theater is performing? And I was like, trust me, our audiences are not going to go to music theater. Or maybe they will once they see a show here, and maybe their audiences will come here if they have a rain out at the amphitheater, which is exactly what happened. And so here inside Roxy's, we're looking to maybe run faster, Sarah Jane, because we have to. In this particular time that we're in, and it's always been part of my mission here to partner with other organizations, and so one of the other theaters and I have started talking about a combined shop effort so that our shop where it is could build both sets of shows with personnel that we share the expenses with, and so that will be one way to help each organization. That we talk to the symphony and talk about us doing a show that the symphony is the orchestra for, and so maybe one of our shows is done in concert hall in a symphony setting there. That music theater, I'm taking a rule right out of their playbook, that maybe we try to do that. Earlier I said we're looking to make that semi-professional chamber choir happen inside here so that we provide some concerts and that we do some really family-oriented things that work with young artists. I have taught at Wichita State and Kansas Newman and am looking to continue those partnerships and internships with young talent, bringing them up the way so that we can do that, which then became the natural, well, if you're doing that and it's already part of your mission, then why are you not teaching classes inside Roxy's to people out in the community that may want that experience and that opportunity? So last week at the show I said I was going to teach lawyers how to behave in a courtroom. Yesterday I was served with a summons to come see a lawyer, so I'm not saying that anymore. But anyway, now we're gonna keep doing things like that to extend our fingers out to network in any way that we can.
What about you, Alex? Do you have like a shifting direction moving forward, or some things that you want to try at the Cotillion or elsewhere?
Not so much. I mean, the groundwork was laid for the Cotillion a long time ago. I mean, I was fortunate. I say fortunate in buying a 2,000 cap venue 2 years before COVID. But we made it, and that says a lot. And we're still here, and that was because of really good systems in place. So I'm not trying to change the world when it comes to that. I think, I will say, since 2018, when we took over, we've made a ton of facility improvements. I mean, that building was built in 1960, ripped up all the carpet, exposed some great terrazzo tile, and took it back and gave a nod to the era that it belongs in. And so our goal is just to keep up with the facility. We're the new school of a very classically family-owned business that I think is a jewel of Wichita, and my job is to preserve it and enhance it, and that's what we'll keep on doing. That being said, I should have jumped in a little earlier on the whole facility fee. So when you get mad at those ticket fees, just remember, we all have huge facilities that require a ton of maintenance. You know, air conditioning units, 8 of them, 10 to 15 ton units. I mean, that's a very expensive replacement cost. So that's what I'm focusing on, and focusing on trying to get a little bit more coordinated with our competitors, and so that we're not, just hurting ourselves as a community by bidding against each other to get these acts. You know, at some point we have to say, take it, do it, fine, we're not going to pay it, but go ahead, instead of like fighting just to get the show. And we're trying to work together to try to manage traffic so that we spread it out and make sure people have good options and we're not stepping on each other's toes. So, and making sure the right acts play the right facilities. So,
thank you. I have an audience question here from Dee, who asks, can you address audience demographic changes and how it affects programming now and in the future? Anyone want to grab that one? Angela, yeah?
I love this question. So we, before coming to musical theater, I was a symphony administrator. And in both symphonies and in theaters, we have spent a lot of time over the past 100 years or so saying, but our audiences are getting older, and we really panic, and we've panicked for decades. And the thing is I think we just have to recognize that people go through different life stages. And so I'm always saying, we have some great subscribers who are in their 30s, and I am happy for every single one of them. But the 30-year-olds, I don't need them to subscribe. I want them to come once a year. I want them to come see the Disney show, or I want them to come have a girls' night out and see something like Kinky Boots. I want them to come once a year, every year. And then when they're 50 and they're not doing soccer games every single night of the week, then they should subscribe. We want relationship with younger audiences, but if they don't subscribe until their kids are out of school or out of the house, then that's fine, because there are new 50-year-olds every year. So we don't worry too much about the age of our audiences. And we have a really nice range. And I think a lot of that is because of our youth programs, that we have a lot of young people who are really interested in theater. Their parents become interested in theater. But we don't worry about how old our audience is. And also, I think the more experienced and more mature of our audiences sometimes get a bad rap, because people will say, oh, your older audiences won't like X or Y show. And that is not always the case. There are a handful of people that wrote to us because they did not like Rock of Ages. We said there is sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and they wrote to us because they read that description and they came to the show, but they did not like sex, drugs, or rock and roll. So that happens sometimes. But we also had a lot of people in their 70s and 80s who brought their lawn chairs outside and said, we had the best time at this show. So we're not going to make all of our programming decisions based on audience age, because we find that we often misguess what people actually want to see. And often some of the 30 and 40-year-olds really want to see Oklahoma because they watched it when they were children with their grandparents on TV, and so they have that nostalgia. So we just don't want to make those kinds of assumptions. I do think that Wichita is becoming a more diverse city, and we are very cognizant of that. The theater is always trying to be a welcoming and diverse place, and so I think that is something that we really pay attention to. Our onstage talent is also very diverse, because that is what's happening across the country at musical theater schools and everywhere else. So we do pay attention to that, but that's my answer. It's long.
Okay. Do you want to add something, Rick?
Yeah, the number one question we get asked inside Roxy's downtown box office is, do you have an age restriction? And we tell those people that call and say, we feel like you know your children better than we know your children. We can tell you how we would rate it according to a movie guideline, and then you make the decision as to whether you think it's appropriate for your children to come to or not. And it's really interesting. I'll second what Angela said. The older audiences that come here that see shows that I like to say, have you met me? Because I like to push people's buttons and push them to the edge of the envelope sometimes. They love what they're getting a chance to see that they may not see someplace else. And so it's been really rewarding. And so I don't pay attention much like that to that. I don't look at the demographic.
Lindsay, what happens to Wichita if the performing arts do not continue to thrive or to grow? How is our economy affected? What do you feel is at stake?
Well, I don't see that as an option, so it's a very hypothetical.
We don't see
I'm going to
this,
ignore that side of it because it's not going to happen. I don't think this community would let it, but I would think our community economically would definitely take a hit. We'd just plateau. I don't know that it would ever fizzle just because we have an amazing kind of pipeline of performing arts community between the different universities and the dance programs that exist within the community, both in the kind of public sector and private sector. This community won't let it fail. I truly believe that. But we would see a huge dip in the economy side of things. So I mentioned the AEP, or the Arts and Economic Prosperity Study that we're doing right now. The last time we did it was in 2015, and that data really folded in through 2017. So we're really excited to get the data back at the end of this year to really showcase how did we recover from the pandemic, or did we not recover, but we know that we had 20 years of growth rate to show that we were going there. Our preliminary data shows that we've already blown 2015 numbers out the window. So we know our community is growing economically in the performing arts sector, or really in the nonprofit arts sector. So if there was a pause in that at all, we would see a dip specifically in transient guest tax and hospitality, where performing arts exists. We know all the other small businesses exist, bars, restaurants, boutiques, hotels. They hub around the performing arts sector. So it's not just if the lights go dark, it impacts so much more of the community.
Here's an audience question, the last one I'm going to fit in for this evening, that sort of kind of dovetails with that. They say, Wichita has some incredible talent. How do we keep it here? Do you want to start on that one, Angela?
Yeah. I don't know if this is the answer to the question, but it is what I have been thinking about for a little bit here. A couple of these last questions have really made me think about Wichita's children. And pre-pandemic, there were a couple of ways that our children were struggling. And that is, first of all, that there are a number of zip codes where we're far behind in literacy and math and graduation rates. And then secondly, I think all of our children, regardless of socioeconomic status, are struggling with social and emotional learning and how to feel big emotions and how to turn those into positive things, especially as they get out of their elementary years and into their middle and teen years. And I think that the pandemic only exacerbated that, and that the communities, the education community, the communities that work on those issues need the arts in order to make progress in those areas. We have invested a lot over the past couple of years in teaching and hiring a teaching artist and trying to get into some of the public schools and working with a lot of different kids, and really not so much focused on like how do we make Broadway stars, but really like how do we let kids be kids and let their creativity lead them and use music and dance and play to do that. And I know there are really strong correlations in the visual arts. I know that there are a lot of artists who are really trying to work in that area of, helping children grow into healthy adults. And so I think if we don't make an investment in our arts, then there's a whole community that suffers, and I think we fail our children if we don't do that. And that the reason that I think that ties into keeping talent in Wichita is because for people who do have children, the thing that really keeps them here is that their kids are happy here, and there are so many opportunities. And I think for artists who don't have children or their children are grown, they end up making a big part of their living teaching, working with kids, and or they just have this like compassionate passion for like taking their skills and teaching the next generation. So that's how I tie that together. Someone else can do a better job.
Well, I want to ask one more question to the whole panel here this evening. Just simply, beyond going to more shows, maybe that's the answer, but beyond that, what should individuals be doing to support local venues and performing arts in our region? Go ahead, Rick.
So during Ride the Cyclone, I said this every night to the audiences. There is sitting in our audience a gentleman who was fully employed at Southwestern University. And because of the COVID situation and the lack of enrollment and the things that happened there, they lost $1.8 million. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that they did was cut the humanities. They cut the arts programs at Southwestern. So there is no more theater department that teaches classes, and there is no choir department that teaches classes necessarily. And so I said, the next time you see a donate button at the bottom of a ticket, the next time you see a how could I volunteer, a how could I help, please click on those. Do that so that these venues that we're all talking about today, the Cotillion and Music Theater, wherever it lands, and Roxy's Downtown and the Forum and Mosley Street Melodrama and Crown Arts Collaborative and Wichita Community Theater, that they continue to exist because of things like that. I will leave you with this. One of our great friends here at Roxy's is Lyric Theater of Oklahoma, and they work in Oklahoma City. They have 2 different venues. Michael sent an email thanking me for coming to see a show, and it was kind of the generic email that all of you get after you come and see a show. And one of the facts was 60% of their funding comes from ticket sales. The rest has to be from donations. So when Angela was talking about those donations right at the jump of that, we all rely on that, and without it, we're going to see a lot more colleges do away with programs, and we're going to see people leave the community because there's not going to be as many places to work. So
I'm a Southwestern College grad, and I came to this area. I went to school in Winfield because I was on a drama scholarship, and I met my future band members, which is why I started buying bars in Wichita, because the first place I played was Kirby's Beer Store. So, I mean, it shows you the connection. So I'm going to agree with that sentiment that we have to support the arts for young people, because that will fuel everything else. I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for the debate and theater program at Southwestern College. So, you know, I think it makes sense. I think we have to embrace art and make sure it's a part of youth's curriculum. I'm always, you know, my earliest exposure to music was my 6th grade music teacher, and it was off to the races from that point on. And it's the only reason I'm working in the field that I am, you know. So I agree with that. I agree with supporting the arts. That's why Kirby's has been a big part of WSU's art programs and started an endowment there. I always contribute to the arts in that sense. I'm on whatever board I can to support that when I have time. So I agree with that. Like, put your efforts and your money into, you know, art organizations that will raise more artists and more people that will attend art events.
Go ahead, Lindsay.
Yes, and volunteering, donating, all the things, holding your civic leaders accountable and engage with them accordingly. Vote. It's a great season for voting, especially locally, and make sure leadership knows what's important to you. And then I'd also just challenge to break down your own even internal silos, which I think even the year and a half I've been here, I've seen a lot of silos come down from my individual perspective. But try new art forms. If you're tried and true to one organization, that doesn't mean that's your only art outlet. We have a lot of great, from just a performing arts capacity, opera, dance, music, theater, you name it, or a myriad of all of those who are working in so many different creative outlets. So use your word of mouth, spread the word, share things on social media, and try something new. But also don't forget about your fan favorites at the same time. So it's okay to support lots of organizations and artists. That doesn't mean you have to be a $1 million donor to every one of them. If you are, that'd be fabulous. But that $1 donation or just volunteering to be an usher is so important and so valuable. It's so many different organizations, and helping load in and load out, all just kind of the behind the scenes stuff that's really labor intensive, but it makes for a wonderful community. And then my thought process on where all of this comes together is a dynamic arts community makes just for a better community at large. Art is where we have the capacity to have safe conversations about challenging subjects that are happening. So whatever is happening locally, nationally, internationally, these hard topics that we're being faced with day to day, art is a safe space to have those conversations and to have discourse with opposing viewpoints. And when we lose that, or if we start to say that's not important or that's a luxury, then we're losing our values in a community. So I think Wichita, again, I don't think Wichita would let that happen, but keep the conversations going. And I think that's why a community conversation like this tonight is just one of the many things that makes Wichita such a beautiful place. So keep it up.
Thank you. Angela, you get the last word.
Yeah, I would say, in addition to attending, donating, all that kind of stuff, spreading the word, we realized during COVID that we had not historically done a great job of advocacy with elected officials at the federal, state, and local levels. And I think that's pretty well reflected in the statistic that I'm about to share, which is over the past 15 years, our funding from government sources has dropped about 57%, and when you adjust that for inflation, it drops 70%, and that's on a downward spiral. And it's for a lot of reasons, but when we had this major crisis, there were a lot of organizations that sort of sprung up within the theater community, and then NEVA, the Association of Independent Venues, I'm getting the name wrong, but they worked so hard on getting some emergency federal funding and did something that we have never seen in any of our lifetimes. Anybody who's an arts administrator right now has never seen that kind of federal funding flow to arts organizations before. We never expected it would stay, but it did really drive home that it's important to have proactive, positive relationships with all of our elected officials at every level. And that's impossible for staff members to do on their own. So I think that's where concerned community members and board members and volunteers can come in and just really foster relationships and help be that conduit so that we can work on things proactively rather than being just in a reactionary position all the time. So that's what I would just add. This is obviously a very civic-minded group. Thanks for being here tonight.
Well, let's have a great big round of applause for our panel tonight. Thank you all so much. And thank you for joining this important conversation. You can find recordings of Engage ICT at engageict.org, and this conversation will go onto our website probably in the next week or so. You can go there and share it with friends and family. And check out our conversation that we had last month on water. That was a really good one as well. I do just want to thank you so much for being part of this impactful event series. It's been my pleasure to serve as your host. For KMUW, I'm Sarah Jane Crespo.